Blake Whitaker thought he was untouchable, and for most of his life, everybody around him had been kind enough or scared enough to let him believe it. But the day he shoved Naomi Bell into a row of lockers in front of half of Pine Harbor Academy, he did not realize he had just picked a fight with the one family in Briar Creek that even grown men lowered their voices to talk about. And honestly, that was the thing about Blake. He was not smart enough to be afraid until fear was already sitting in the room with him. Naomi Bell was 15, quiet in that way people always mistake for weakness. The kind of girl who walked through school with one earbud in, a paperback tucked against her ribs, and her eyes pointed just low enough to make adults think she was shy, and kids think she was shy, and kids think she was easy. She was not popular. She was not loud. She was not the type to throw a tray across the cafeteria or clap back with some perfect little movie line. She just moved through Pine Harbor like she was trying not to take up too much space, which is a dangerous thing to do in a school where space belonged to whoever had the richest parents, the loudest friends, and the least amount of shame. Pine Harbor Academy sat on the edge of Briar Creek, Georgia, all red brick, white columns, and fake tradition. The kind of private school that put honor and leadership on banners in the hallway, while pretending not to see what happened right under the security cameras. Everybody there knew the rules, not the ones printed in the student handbook. The real ones. The ones kids learned by lunchtime on the first day. If your dad donated to the athletic wing, you could get away with almost anything. If your mom chaired the fundraiser committee, teachers smiled through gritted teeth when you interrupted class. And if you were alone, if you had no group, no last name people recognized, no one to sit with under the oak trees by the courtyard, then you kept your head down and hoped nobody bored enough noticed you. Blake Whitaker noticed Naomi in October, which was unlucky because Blake got meaner when football season started going badly. He was a junior, tall, blonde, good-looking in a way that made adults forgive him too fast, and he had that lazy rich kid smile that said he had never once been told no by someone who could make it stick. His father, Preston Whitaker, owned 3 car dealerships, 2 construction companies, and enough local politicians to treat City Hall like a second office. So Blake grew up learning a very simple lesson. If you break something, somebody else pays for it. If you hurt somebody, your father makes a phone call. And if anyone complains, you call them dramatic until they get tired and disappear. At first, Naomi was just a little entertainment to him. Nothing serious, at least that was what he would have said if you asked him, because boys like Blake always call cruelty a joke when they are the ones laughing. He started with small things, bumping her shoulder in the hallway and saying, "My bad, Belle, did not see you there," even though he saw her perfectly, sliding her notebook off her desk when he walked past in English, asking loud enough for the room to hear she was writing sad poems about having no friends, tossing a grape at the back of her head during lunch and pretending to look around like some great mystery had happened. The strange part, the part that bothered him more than he wanted to admit, was that Naomi never gave him what he wanted. She did not cry, did not snap, did not run to the office. She just picked up her notebook, wiped grape juice off her sleeve, and looked at him with those calm, dark eyes like she was memorizing him for later. And that right there, that quiet look, got under Blake's skin worse than any insult could have. See, Blake was used to reactions. He liked reactions. He collected them like trophies. A flinch, a nervous laugh, a kid rushing out of the room red-faced. That was how he knew he still had control. But Naomi did not perform pain for him. And to a boy who had built his whole personality around being feared, that felt like disrespect. His friends noticed it too. Especially Madison Vale, Blake's girlfriend that month, because with Blake, there was always a girlfriend that month. Madison had sharp eyebrows, glossy lips, and the survival instincts of someone who knew popularity was a rented apartment, not a house you owned. She laughed when Blake wanted laughter. She rolled her eyes when he wanted an audience. But even she started watching Naomi differently after a while, because Naomi's silence was not empty, it had weight to it, and the more Blake pushed, the heavier that silence became. One Thursday morning, right before history class, Blake blocked Naomi's way outside room 214, leaning one shoulder against the doorframe like he owned the building. He had 2 of his friends with him, Tyler Nash and Owen Briggs, both of them grinning that nervous grin boys wear when they are not brave enough to be cruel alone, but still want credit for standing close to it. Naomi tried to step around him. Blake shifted with her. "Come on," he said, smiling down at her. "Do not be rude. Say good morning." Naomi kept her books pressed against her chest and said nothing, and Blake tilted his head like a disappointed teacher. "Wow," he said, "she speaks fluent creepy." that got a few laughs from the kids gathering in the hall. Not big laughs, not honest laughs, the kind people give because silence might make them the next target. Naomi looked past his shoulder toward the classroom door. Blake's smile twitched because, again, she was not giving him the thing he wanted, so he leaned closer and lowered his voice just enough to make it feel personal. You think you are better than us, Belle? Is that it? Or are you just too weird to know when someone is talking to you, Naomi? Naomi finally looked at him, really looked at him, and said, I know when somebody is talking. Blake, I just do not answer every noise I hear. Now, it was not loud. It was not dramatic. She did not say it with some big hero energy, but the hallway went still for half a second, and half a second is a lifetime in high school. Tyler made a little choking sound. Somebody near the lockers whispered, damn, and Blake's face changed so fast most people missed it. That rich boy smile dropped, and underneath it was something uglier, something embarrassed and hungry. He stepped closer, close enough that Naomi could smell mint gum and expensive cologne, and he said, you might want to watch how you talk to me. Naomi answered, you might want to watch who you talk to. That should have been the warning, right there, plain as daylight. Not a threat exactly, more like a locked gate with a sign on it. But Blake had spent his whole life walking through locked gates because somebody always opened them for him, so he laughed, loud and fake, and slapped her books out of her hands. They hit the floor hard, pages folding under the weight. Her paperback skidded under the radiator, and the hallway did what hallways do when something cruel happens. It held its breath, waiting to see which way power would lean. Naomi crouched slowly and gathered her things without rushing, and Blake stood over her, grinning again because now he felt better. Now the world made sense. She was on the floor and he was above her. The picture looked right to him, but as Naomi reached for the last book, Mr. Halpern, the history teacher, opened the classroom door and froze. He saw the books, saw Blake's grin, saw Naomi on the floor, and you could see the math happening behind his eyes. A teacher with a mortgage, 2 kids, and a principal who played golf with Preston Whitaker every other Sunday. He cleared his throat and said, everyone inside, please. That was it. Everyone inside, please. Not Blake, what happened? Not Naomi, are you okay? Just the soft little sentence adults use when they are choosing peace for themselves over justice for somebody else. Naomi stood, hugged her books tighter, and walked into class. Blake, brushing past her with his shoulder just hard enough to make her stumble. And Mr. Halpern looked away. By lunch, the story had already changed, because stories always change when cowards tell them. Suddenly Naomi had mouthed off for no reason. Suddenly Blake had only been joking. Suddenly everyone had seen it, but nobody had really seen it. And Madison, sitting at Blake's table near the windows, said, maybe she is one of those quiet girls who thinks being mysterious is a personality. Blake laughed too hard at that, louder than he needed to because he was still thinking about what Naomi had said. You might want to watch who you talk to. And it annoyed him that he kept hearing it in his head. Naomi sat alone at the far end of the cafeteria. Same as always, a plastic tray in front of her, a chicken sandwich still wrapped in paper, an apple, and a bottle of water she brought from home because the cafeteria water tasted like a swimming pool. She could feel eyes on her, not all of them cruel, some curious, some guilty, some just bored, but none of them friendly enough to matter. Across the room, Blake watched her, tapping 2 fingers against the table. Madison leaned close and said, let it go, Blake, but she said it softly, because she already knew he would not. That was the problem with boys like him. They do not let things go, because letting something go feels too much like losing. He stood up with the easy confidence of somebody stepping onto a stage, and walked across the cafeteria, Tyler and Owen following him because sidekicks never know when the movie is about to turn dark. The room noticed immediately. Forks paused, conversations thinned out. Even the lunch monitors looked up and then looked down again, which tells you almost everything you need to know about Pine Harbor Academy. Blake stopped at Naomi's table and smiled. Hey, Belle, he said. We were just wondering something. Naomi did not answer. She kept one hand on the edge of her tray. Blake picked up her apple and turned it in his hand. You eat like somebody's grandmother packed this in a hurry, he said. What is this? Charity lunch? Naomi looked at the apple, then at him. Put it down. A few kids made that little ooh sound. Not because what she said was clever, but because she had said anything at all. Blake's jaw tightened. There it was again, that tiny public cut, and he could not stand it. So he picked up the wrapped sandwich, held it in the air, and said, Ladies and gentlemen, today on Sad Lunches of America, we have one lonely sandwich prepared by, I do not know, a ghost, maybe. Tyler laughed. Owen slapped the table behind him. Madison covered her mouth, but her eyes were not smiling anymore. Naomi stood up slowly, not scared, not angry, just tired. Blake moved closer and lowered the sandwich toward her like he was offering it to a dog. "Go ahead," he said. "Take it. Unless you are too proud for that too." Naomi reached for it, and at the last second, Blake let it fall. The sandwich landed on the tile between them with a soft, ugly slap. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Blake lifted his sneaker and pressed it down, not fast, not by accident, slowly, grinding the bread into the floor until the filling smeared out in a pale line across the tile. There was laughter then, real laughter from some, nervous laughter from others, and the worst kind of silence from everybody else. Naomi looked down at the ruined sandwich, then up at Blake, and there was something in her face that he did not understand, not humiliation, not fear, not even hatred, just a calm little distance, like she had stepped outside the moment and left him there performing for people who suddenly seemed smaller than he did. Blake leaned in, still smiling, but the smile was getting thin. "What? No comeback now." Naomi picked up her bag from the chair and said, "No, I think you said enough for both of us." Then she walked out of the cafeteria. Nobody stopped her, nobody followed her, nobody even knew what to do with the silence she left behind. And Blake, who should have felt like he had won, stood there with mashed bread under his shoe and a strange cold feeling crawling up the back of his neck. What he did not know, what nobody at Pine Harbor knew, was that Naomi Bell had grown up inside a house where people did not raise their voices when they were angry. They got quiet. Her father, Solomon Bell, was not famous in the normal way. You would not see his face on billboards. He did not sponsor school events or smile at ribbon cuttings. But in Briar Creek, grown men from the docks, the old boxing gym, and the back rooms of certain restaurants all knew his name. Some called him a businessman, some called him a fixer, some just called him Mr. Bell and left it there, because the less you said about Solomon Bell, the better your week tended to go. Naomi had never bragged about him, never used his name to scare anybody. Honestly, she hated the weight of it, hated the weight of it, hated the way Prawns straightened up when he walked into a room, hated the way police officers suddenly got polite, hated that her life was wrapped in a kind of protection she had never asked for and could never fully explain. She wanted to be normal, or at least normal enough to survive school without everybody whispering, so she kept her last name small, kept her head down, let people assume whatever they wanted. But that afternoon, after the sandwich, after the hallway whispers, after Mr. Halford pretended not to see her standing outside the bathroom with wet paper towels pressed against her shaking hands, Naomi sat alone on the back steps behind the library and finally let herself breathe. She did not cry, not exactly. A tear slipped out and she wiped it away fast, angry at herself for letting even that much happen, because crying felt like giving Blake a receipt, proof that his cruelty had landed. The door opened behind her and a girl named Clara Finch stepped out holding a pass in one hand and a carton of milk in the other. Clara was the kind of student teachers described as sweet because they had never seen her decide not to be. She was quiet, freckled, always carrying too many pens, and she had watched Blake's little show from 2 tables away without laughing. She stood there awkwardly for a second, then said, "I saved your apple." Naomi looked at her, confused, and Clara held it out like it was some sacred peace offering. For some reason, that almost made Naomi laugh. Almost. "Thanks," Naomi said. Clara sat beside her without asking, leaving a careful bit of space between them, and after a moment she said, "He is awful." Naomi turned the apple in her hand. "People keep acting like that is weather, like we all just have to dress for it." Clara nodded, because that was exactly what it felt like. Blake Whitaker was not treated like a person making choices. He was treated like a storm system, unpleasant, predictable, and nobody's fault. They sat there until the bell rang, and before Clara went back inside, she hesitated and said, "For what it is worth, he looks stupid." Naomi finally smiled a little. "Yeah," she said, "but stupid with an audience is still dangerous." That night, Naomi went home to a house at the end of Willowglass Road, a long, low brick place behind black iron gates and magnolia trees. Nothing flashy from the street, no gold lions, no fountain, just quiet money, and the kind of stillness that made delivery drivers double-check the address. The father was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled to his elbows, stirring red sauce in a cast-iron pot like a regular dad in a regular house, which he could be sometimes if you caught him before the phone rang. Solomon Bell was 60 years old, broad-shouldered, close-shaved gray hair, hands scarred from a younger life he never talked about unless the room had earned it, and eyes so steady they made lies feel embarrassed. He looked up when Naomi came in, and right away his face changed. Not much, just enough. "You eat today, baby." Naomi put her backpack on a chair. Not really. Solomon set the spoon down. Why not? There are questions fathers ask because they need information, and questions they ask because they need information, and questions they ask because they already know the shape of the answer and want to hear how bad it is. Naomi opened her mouth, then closed it. She had spent all day telling herself she could swallow it, bury it, walk into school tomorrow like nothing happened, because that was what she did, that was what she had always done. But standing in that warm kitchen, smelling garlic and tomatoes, seeing her father trying so hard to look calm, something inside her loosened. This boy at school, she said, and Solomon did not move. His name is Blake Whitaker. At the sound of that last name, Solomon's eyes narrowed just a little, because in Briar Creek, last names carried histories, debts, favors, and old dirt. Naomi told him some of it, not all of it, not the worst parts exactly. She made it smaller because kids do that when they are used to adults making their pain inconvenient. She said he messed with her books, said things, embarrassed her at lunch, and Solomon listened without interrupting. But with every sentence, the kitchen seemed to get quieter. When she finished, he turned the stove off. Just like that, the sauce kept bubbling for a few seconds, then settled. Solomon wiped his hands on a towel and said, "Did he touch you?" Naomi looked at the floor. "He shoved me this morning." Solomon folded the towel once, then again, very neatly, too neatly. "Anybody see? Everybody saw. Anybody help?" Naomi did not answer, and that answer was enough. Solomon nodded once, slow, like he had just confirmed something ugly about the world he had hoped might not apply to his daughter. Then he said, "I will handle it." Naomi's head snapped up. "No." It came out sharper than she meant. Solomon looked at her. "No, Dad, please. You cannot just go do whatever you are thinking of doing." "I do not even know what I am thinking of doing yet," he said, which was his idea of a joke. But it did not land. Naomi stepped closer, her voice low now, urgent. "I mean it. I do not want to be that girl. I do not want people scared of me because of you." Solomon's face softened, and for a second he was just her father, not Mr. Bell, not the man whispered about. Just a tired parent looking at the one person in the world who could still make him feel powerless. "Baby," he said, "people like Blake Whitaker do not stop because you ask nice." "Maybe not," Naomi said, "but I have to go back there." "You do not." "Yes, I do." Her voice shook, but she held it steady enough. "If you burn the whole place down around him, I am still the one walking through those halls afterward." Solomon looked at her for a long time, and she could see him fighting himself. The old part of him that solved problems fast, and the father part that understood this was not just about punishment. It was about what kind of person Naomi would have to become after. Finally, he nodded. "All right," he said. "We do this your way first." Naomi exhaled. "Thank you." But then Solomon lifted one finger. "Your way does not mean alone." And that was how the first real mistake Blake Whitaker made turned into the first quiet move against him. Solomon did not send men to scare him. He did not make phone calls in the middle of the night, not yet. He did something much worse for a boy protected by image. He started collecting truth. By morning, Clara Finch had sent Naomi a video. Not the whole cafeteria scene, but enough. Blake holding the sandwich, the laughter around him, the shoe coming down, the Naomi walking away while he stood there smiling like a fool. Naomi stared at the video on her phone in the girls' bathroom before first period, her stomach twisting, because seeing it from the outside was different, somehow worse, but underneath the shame there was something else now, something solid, evidence. Clara texted, "I am sorry I did not do more." Naomi typed back, "You did something now." And maybe that would have been enough if Blake had stopped there, but of course he did not, because a boy like Blake mistakes silence for permission and mercy for weakness. And when he saw Naomi walk into school the next day with her back a little straighter, when he saw Clara sit beside her in English, when he realized the cafeteria stunt had not broken her, he decided he needed a bigger stage. By lunch, a picture was spreading through Pine Harbor Academy, first in group chats, then on private stories, then everywhere. It was a photo of Naomi from the cafeteria, edited until her eyes looked huge and hollow, her mouth twisted into a strange grin with bold red letters across the top that said, "Willow Glass Witch." Under it, comments piled up fast, some cruel, some pretending to be jokes, some asking if she was going to curse the school, and one from Blake's private account that simply said, "Told y'all she was creepy." Naomi saw it while standing near her locker, and for the first time all week, the noise around her seemed to go underwater. Kids stared, phones tilted away when she passed, somebody laughed and then stopped when she looked over. Madison Vale watched from across the hall with her arms folded. Not laughing now, not exactly, but not stopping it either. Naomi's hands went cold. She opened the image, zoomed in on her own warped face. and something inside her went very still. Not sad, not scared. Still. Blake had not just embarrassed her this time. He had tried to rewrite her, tried to make the whole school see a monster where there was only a girl who had refused to bow her head low enough for him. She locked her phone, walked past the whispering students, and went through the rest of the day like a ghost with a pulse. When she got home, Solomon was in his study, sitting behind an old wooden desk with reading glasses low on his nose and a stack of papers beside him. Naomi did not knock. She walked in, placed her phone on the desk, opened the edited picture, then set Claire's video beside it. Solomon looked at the screen. He did not speak. He watched the video once, then watched it again. The room was so quiet Naomi could hear the clock ticking behind her. Finally, Solomon removed his glasses and placed them carefully on the desk. Who made this? Naomi swallowed. Blake Whitaker. Solomon leaned back in his chair, and there it was. That awful calm, the kind Naomi had seen only a handful of times in her life. When a contractor tried to cheat her grandmother. When a man at a restaurant put his hand on her mother's waist. When somebody on the phone said something they should not have said. He was not angry in the loud way. He was past loud. Naomi whispered, "Dad?" Solomon looked up at her and his voice was gentle, almost too gentle. "You gave it a chance." She did not answer. He tapped one finger beside the phone. He made his choice. And somewhere across town, Blake Whitaker was sitting in his bedroom, laughing at comments, thinking the whole thing was just another joke. Thinking his father's money could clean up anything. Thinking Naomi Bell was still alone, and that was the last peaceful thought he was going to have for a very long time. The first thing Solomon Bell did was not call Blake Whitaker, and that was what made it worse, because a hot-headed man would have called, cursed, threatened, maybe even driven over to the Whitaker house with tires screaming and anger hanging out the window. But Solomon was not hot-headed. Not anymore. Hot-headed was something he had survived when he was young and stupid. Now he was patient, and patient men can ruin you before you even know they have entered the room. Naomi stood in the doorway of his study, watching him look at the edited picture again, then the cafeteria video, then the comment thread under Blake's post, and every time his eyes moved across the screen, his face became calmer, not softer, calmer, like ice settling over deep water. He picked up the phone on his desk, not his cell, the old landline he kept for people who knew better than to call unless it mattered. And he pressed one button. Naomi knew that button. She had seen him use it twice in her life. Once when her uncle's bar got shut down over a permit that somehow appeared to be missing, and once when a man from Atlanta came to town asking questions nobody wanted answered. On the other end, someone picked up without saying hello. Solomon said, "I need the school clean by morning." Naomi stepped forward. "Dad." He raised one hand, not looking at her, not to silence her like she was a child, but to tell her he had heard her fear and was choosing his words carefully. He said into the phone, "Nothing loud, nothing stupid. I want names, timestamps, who shared it first, who pushed it, who watched and smiled, all of it." Then he hung up. Naomi's throat tightened. What does that mean? Solomon leaned back in his chair and finally looked at her. It means nobody gets to lie tomorrow. That sounded simple, almost reasonable, but Naomi knew her father well enough to know simple sentences from him usually carried heavy furniture behind them. She sat on the leather chair across from his desk and rubbed her thumb over the edge of her phone case, trying not to look like she was falling apart. "I do not want anybody hurt," she said. Solomon's eyes softened just a little. "I know I mean it." "So do I." "Then what are you going to do?" He looked at the phone on the desk, at the warped image of his daughter that some spoiled boy had made for laughs, and for the first time that night, a little bit of pain passed across his face before the calm covered it again. "I am going to make the truth inconvenient." That was all he said, and somehow that scared Naomi more than if he had shouted. Across town, Blake Whitaker was having the best night of his week. He was stretched across his bed in a room bigger than Naomi's entire kitchen, one sneaker still on, scrolling through his phone while Tyler and Owen blew up the group chat with laughing emojis, and Madison kept sending half-hearted messages like, "Okay, maybe take it down before someone complains," which only made Blake grin harder. Somebody had turned the picture into a sticker. Somebody else had made a fake account called Willow Glass Witch. By 10:30, half of Pine Harbor had seen it, and by 11, Blake had convinced himself he had not done anything that bad, because that is what people like him do. They commit the harm first and hold the trial afterward, with themselves as the judge. His father, Preston Whitaker, walked past his open door around 11:15, wearing a navy robe and holding a glass of bourbon, and said, "You better not be doing anything stupid on that phone." Blake did not even look up. "Relax, Dad, it is school stuff." Preston paused in the doorway. "School stuff costs money when you are careless." Blake laughed. Nobody cares. Some weird girl got roasted, that is all. Preston stared at him for a second, and if he had been a wiser man, he might have heard the little warning bell ringing somewhere in the back of the house. But Preston Whitaker was built from the same soft arrogance as his son, only with better shoes and more expensive lawyers, so he just said, "Do not put our name on anything," then kept walking. That was the Whitaker family motto. Really, not do not hurt people, not do the right thing, just do not put our name on anything. The next morning at Pine Harbor Academy, everything looked normal for about 9 minutes. The buses pulled in, kids spilled through the front doors, somebody dropped a coffee near the trophy case, the cheer team clustered around the east stairwell, and Blake arrived late in his silver Jeep with music loud enough to rattle the windows of the admissions office. He stepped out like he always did, one hand in his pocket, chin up, waiting for the world to arrange itself around him. Tyler met him near the front steps, but he was not laughing. Owen stood a little behind him, pale, staring down at his phone. Blake frowned. "What?" Tyler swallowed. "Your post is gone." Blake pulled out his phone. "So?" "No, man," Tyler said. "It is gone." Blake pulled out his phone. "So?" "No, man," Tyler said. "It is gone. My repost is gone too." Owen looked up. "My account is locked." Blake rolled his eyes and opened his private story, except it was not there. Then his photo app froze. Then his messages started loading blank, and for one bright, stupid second, he thought the school Wi-Fi was bad. Then Madison came rushing over from the parking lot, her face tight, no gloss, no performance. "Blake, did you get an email?" "What email?" She shoved her phone toward him. It was from Pine Harbor's dean of students, copied to parents, advisory staff, the headmaster, and an outside legal address Blake did not recognize. The subject line was not dramatic. It said, "Notice of Student Conduct Review and Digital Harassment Inquiry." Those words hit Blake like a slap because they sounded adult, and adult words were dangerous. Adult words left paper trails. He scanned the email, saw his name, saw Naomi's name, saw the phrase manipulated image, saw harassment, saw defamation, saw school disciplinary policy, saw potential law enforcement referral, and his face changed. Tyler whispered, "Dude, they have screenshots." Owen added, "They had the cafeteria video." Blake looked at him. "What cafeteria video?" Owen's eyes flicked toward the front doors. "Somebody sent it in." Blake felt heat rise up his neck. For the first time, he looked around and noticed something was different. People were watching him, but not the way they watched yesterday, not with hungry little smiles waiting for him to do something funny. They were watching the way people watch a dog that has slipped its collar and might get hit by a car. Interested, nervous, already stepping back. Inside the school, Naomi was at her locker with Clara beside her, and when Blake saw her, his anger grabbed the wheel before his brain could. He marched across the hallway, pushing through 2 freshmen, his voice already sharp. "You think this is cute?" Naomi closed her locker slowly. Blake stopped a few feet from her. "You ran crying to the office." Clara stepped forward before she could stop herself. She did not run anywhere. Blake's eyes snapped to Clara. "Nobody was talking to you." Charity case. Naomi touched Clara's arm lightly, not pulling her back exactly, just steadying her back. Laramore touched Clara's arm lightly, not pulling her back exactly, just steadying her. Then she looked at Blake and said, "You should go to homeroom." That made people whisper, because it sounded too calm, too clean, like she knew something he did not. Blake laughed, but it cracked at the edges. "Or what?" Naomi did not answer. She did not need to. Right then, the dean of students, Ms. Avery, came down the hall with 2 security officers and Mr. Halpern walking behind her looking like he had aged 10 years overnight. "Blake," Ms. Avery said, "come with me, please." The hallway went quiet in a way no bell could have caused. Blake looked around trying to find the usual escape hatch, a teacher who liked him, a friend willing to joke, a crowd that still belonged to him, but every face had pulled back from him. Even Madison was standing near the trophy case, eyes low, pretending to read the email again. Blake tried one last little smirk. "Is this about a meme?" Ms. Avery's face did not move. "This is about a meme." Ms. Avery's face did not move. "This is about you." That sentence landed so hard a sophomore actually whispered, "Oh my God." Blake's smirk disappeared. He looked at Naomi, and for the first time since October, there was no swagger in his eyes, only confusion, not fear yet, not fully, but the doorway to fear had opened, and he could feel the draft. They took him to the administrative building, not the little glass office where kids got detention slips, but the board conference room, the one with framed donor plaques and a long polished table where serious adults sat when they wanted money or silence. Blake expected Ms. Avery, maybe the headmaster, maybe his father on speakerphone telling them to calm down. But when he walked in, he saw a woman in a gray suit sitting at the far end of the table, legal pad open, expression unreadable. Beside her sat Headmaster Cole, sweating through his collar. Blake's stomach sank. Ms. Avery gestured to a chair. Sit. Blake sat, because something about that room made standing feel childish. The woman in gray said, "My name is Renee Lawson. I represent the Bell family." Blake blinked. The Bell family has a lawyer. Renee smiled politely. Most families do when their minor child is digitally harassed, publicly humiliated, physically shoved, and targeted group of students. Blake opened his mouth. That is not what happened. Renee slid a folder across the table. Then you will appreciate the chance to clarify. Blake stared at the folder like it might bite him. Inside were screenshots, times, usernames, private story captures, the edited photo, the original photo, the cafeteria video transcribed frame by frame, and witness statements, including one from Clara Finch, two from freshmen who had laughed yesterday and apparently grown consciences by sunrise, and one from Mr. Halpern that made him look like a man trying to save his pension. Blake flipped through the pages too fast, then too slow. He could feel the walls moving inward. "This is insane," he said. But it came out quieter than he wanted. Headmaster Cole cleared his throat. "Blake, until this review is complete, you are being placed on immediate suspension from campus activities, including football, student council events, and Founders Weekend." Blake looked up fast. "Football?" Ms. Avery said, "Yes." Blake almost laughed because the whole thing was absurd. Not funny, absurd, terrifying absurd. The kind of absurd where the world suddenly remembers consequences exist and hands you years of them at once. You cannot do that. Renee looked at him. They can. And if they do not, we move outside the school. Headmaster Cole's face went a shade lighter. Blake finally understood that this was not detention. This was not a lecture. This was not his father paying for a new scoreboard and making it vanish. This was a machine starting up, quiet and legal and hungry. His father arrived 20 minutes later in a charcoal suit, red-faced with the confidence of a man used to entering rooms and changing the weather. Preston Whitaker did not knock. He opened the conference room door like he owned that too and said, "What the hell is going on here?" Blake nearly sagged with relief. Finally, his father would fix it. His father always fixed it. Preston looked at Headmaster Cole first, not at Blake, because powerful men always look for the adult they can threaten. "Arthur," he said, "we can talk about this privately." Headmaster Cole opened his mouth, but Renee spoke first. "We are talking privately." Preston looked at her, annoyed. "And you are." Renee gave him the same polite smile she had given Blake. Counsel for the Bell family. The name Bell made Preston pause just for a second. Not much. But Blake saw it. Preston recovered quickly. "This is a school matter." Renee folded her hands. "It stopped being only a school matter when your son created and distributed a manipulated image of a minor with the intent to humiliate and socially isolate her." Preston laughed once, sharp and dismissive. "Oh, come on. Kids make stupid memes." Renee nodded. "They do. And parents sometimes teach them the difference between stupid and actionable." The room went quiet. Preston's jaw flexed. "You have no idea who you were talking to." Renee tilted her head. "Mr. Whitaker, with respect, I know exactly who I am talking to, and so does my client." That was the first time Preston did not answer right away. Blake looked between them, sensing something underneath the words, some older current he did not understand. Preston sat slowly. "Fine. What do you want?" Renee's smile disappeared. "Accountability." Preston almost snorted. "Be specific." Renee turned one page on her legal pad. Immediate removal of all posts and derivative content. Written apology to Naomi Bell. Formal disciplinary action recorded by the school. Anti-harassment safeguards ensuring no retaliation. And a meeting with your son present so he understands the matter is finished. Blake blurted, "I am not apologizing to her." Preston shot him a look so sharp. Blake shut up, but the damage was done. Renee looked at Blake for a long moment, then said, "That attitude is precisely why Mr. Bell asked me to attend." Blake's skin prickled. "Mr. Bell." Renee did not explain. She did not have to. Preston understood enough to stand up too fast, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need to make a call," Renee said, "of course." Preston stepped into the hallway, and Blake watched through the conference room glass as his father pulled out his phone, turned away, and spoke low. At first his posture was stiff with anger, then it changed. Shoulder by shoulder, like somebody was stringing parts of him. He stopped pacing. He listened. He looked back through the glass at Blake once, and there was something in his eyes Blake had never seen before. Not frustration, not disappointment, fear. When Preston came back in, His face had gone strangely blank. Blake waited for the rescue. Instead, his father said, "Blake, you are going to apologize." Blake stared at him. "What? You are going to apologize," Preston repeated, "and you are going to give Ms. Murray Lawson access to every account where that image was shared." Blake shook his head. "Dad, are you serious?" Preston leaned over him, voice low enough that only Blake and half the room could hear. "I have never been more serious in my life." That was when Blake started to feel the ground really move, because his father did not bend. His father made other people bend. His father did not tell him to apologize unless there was someone in the room or somewhere outside it who could not be bought. Naomi did not attend that first meeting. Solomon would not let her. Not because he thought she was weak, but because he said a person should not have to sit at a table and listen to people debate whether their pain was inconvenient enough to matter. She spent that period in the library with Clara, pretending to read The Great Gatsby while her phone sat face down between them like a little black bomb. Clara kept glancing at her. "You okay?" Naomi turned a page she had not read. "I hate that question." "Sorry." "No, I mean, it is fine. It is just, what am I supposed to say?" "Yes, I am great. My public humiliation is now paperwork." Clara snorted, then covered her mouth because the librarian looked over. Naomi laughed despite herself. A quick little breath, and for a minute the fear loosened. That was what Clara gave her, not protection, not answers, just a normal human second in a day that had become very abnormal. Then Naomi's phone buzzed, a message from her father. "Come home after school. No stops." She stared at it, and Clara's smile faded. "Is it bad?" Naomi slipped the phone into her bag. "I think bad is just changing outfits." By 3 o'clock, Blake Whitaker had become radioactive. People did not laugh with him in the hallway. They watched him pass and looked away. His suspension from football spread faster than the edited picture had, which felt almost poetic if you had a mean enough sense of humor. Tyler stopped answering his texts. Owen said his mom wanted him out of it. Madison told him she needed space, which in high school means I am choosing the side least likely to explode. Blake sat in his Jeep after school, gripping the steering wheel, jaw tight, cheeks hot, and the humiliation burned worse than anything he had done to Naomi because now it was happening to him. He told himself she had caused it. He told himself she had run to daddy. He told himself he was the victim of some dramatic overreaction. That is another thing about bullies. The moment the mirror turns around, they call it unfair. His phone rang. "Dad." Blake answered fast. "Are you still at school?" "Yeah, go home. Now." Blake heard something in Preston's voice and frowned. "Why?" "Just go home, Blake. Do not stop anywhere. Do not talk to anyone. Do not text your friends. Go home." "Blake, do not stop anywhere. Do not talk to anyone. Do not text your friends. Go home." Blake's anger flared. "This is insane. She is one girl." Preston's voice dropped so low it disappeared. Blake sat there with the phone against his ear, waiting for the part that made sense. "So?" There was silence. Then Preston said, "You really do not know anything, do you?" Blake looked out through the windshield at Naomi, crossing the parking lot with Clara, her backpack over one shoulder, hair lifting a little in the wind, not looking at him, not giving him the satisfaction of fear. He said, "I know she is weird." Preston exhaled. "Listen to me very carefully. You are done with her. You do not speak to her, look at her, post about her, joke about her, or breathe in her direction. If her name comes out of your mouth again, I cannot help you." Blake laughed because he was scared and did not know what else to do with it. "You cannot help me. Dad, you are Preston Whitaker." His father did not laugh, and he is Solomon Bell. Then the line went dead. Blake sat in the Jeep for a long time after that, staring at Naomi until she disappeared into a black sedan waiting near the curb. The driver was an older man in a flat cap. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. But when he turned his head and looked at Blake through the windshield, Blake felt a cold little pinch under his ribs. The man did not glare. He did not threaten. He simply looked, as if adding Blake's face to a list. That night, the Whitaker house did not feel like the Whitaker house. Usually, it was all light and noise. Preston taking calls by the pool. Blake's mother, Elise, floating from room to room with a glass of white wine and the exhausted beauty of someone who had married money and discovered it still came with men. Staff moving quietly through the kitchen, the television glowing in the den. But that night, everything felt muted. Preston was in his office with the door closed. Elise stood in the hallway whispering into her phone, and when Blake walked past, she grabbed his arm hard enough to hurt. "What did you do?" Blake pulled away. "Everybody keeps asking me that. Because nobody can believe you were stupid enough to do it," she snapped. That stunned him more than yelling would have. His mother rarely snapped. She preferred disappointment with good lighting. Blake said, It was a joke. Elise looked at him for a long second, then laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Your father has spent 20 years making sure jokes like yours do not come home with bills attached. This one came home with a name attached. Blake swallowed. Who is he? Elise looked toward Preston's office door. Someone your grandfather once owed money to. The sentence made the house feel colder. Blake had never heard that story. He had never needed to. Family history, to him, was just framed photos and names on buildings, not debts, not fear, not old men who remembered things your money hoped were dead. Before he could ask more, Preston opened the office door. Blake. Inside. Blake followed him in. Preston's office smelled like leather, bourbon, and panic trying to wear cologne. On the desk lay printed copies of the screenshots, the cafeteria video stills, and a letter from Renee Lawson. Preston stood behind the desk but did not sit. Blake, he said, tomorrow morning you're going to record an apology. Blake's face twisted. No way. Preston slammed his palm on the desk so hard the papers jumped. You still think this is about your pride? Blake shut his mouth. Preston pointed at the screenshots. This is defamation. This is harassment. This is assault if they want to push the shove in the hallway. The school is scared because the Bell family has enough to drag this through every room in the county. And if that happens, reporters start asking why Pine Harbor looked the other way. Then they ask why I donate so much. Then they ask what else people looked away from. And then everybody starts digging. Blake stared at him. You mean they can sue us? Preston laughed bitterly. Son, lawsuits are the polite version of what I am worried about. Blake felt the room tilt. Then what are you worried about? Preston looked at him, and for once, he did not look like a father angry at a son. He looked like a man trapped with a bill he knew he had earned. I am worried that Solomon Bell has decided you need a lesson. Blake tried to speak, but nothing came out. Preston walked around the desk, leaned close, lowered his voice. There are men in this town who own things on paper, and there are men who own things because everybody knows better than to argue. Solomon is the second kind. You made his daughter a spectacle. That is not a school prank. That is an insult in public. Blake whispered. I did not know. Preston's eyes hardened. That is the first honest thing you have said all day. For a moment, Blake looked 16 again. Not powerful, not untouchable. Just a stupid boy in an expensive house realizing the world had sharp edges. But fear does not make everybody wise. Sometimes it makes them meaner. The next morning, Blake recorded the apology in the headmaster's office. It was stiff, ugly, and clearly dragged out of him by force. He sat in front of a bookshelf full of leadership awards and said, I want to apologize to Naomi Bell for the image that was shared and for my behavior in the cafeteria. It was inappropriate and hurtful, and I take responsibility. He sounded like a hostage reading a weather report. Naomi watched the video later and misappropriate. Avery's office was Solomon beside her and Renee Lawson across the desk. When it ended, nobody spoke. Miss Avery said, Naomi, do you accept his apology? Naomi looked at the frozen frame of Blake's face on the laptop. Do I have to? Miss Avery looked uncomfortable. No. Then no. Solomon did not smile, but Naomi saw his eyes warm with something like pride. Renee closed the laptop. That is her answer. Avery nodded, and Naomi almost felt sorry for her, almost, because Pine Harbor was not used to students saying no to the neat little endings adults preferred. They wanted the apology accepted, the file closed, the banners in the hallway to mean something again. But Naomi had learned something from the sandwich on the floor, from the edited picture, from every adult who had looked away. Closure was usually just a word powerful people used when they were tired of consequences. Blake's apology video never went public, but somehow everybody knew he had made one because secrets in private schools have legs, wings, and rich parents with group chats. By lunch, the whole school was buzzing. Some kids said Blake cried during it, which was not true, but enjoyable. Some said Naomi's father had threatened to buy the school, which was also not true but sounded possible enough to spread. Some said Blake was being sent away. That one came later. Naomi walked into the cafeteria with Clara beside her and felt the entire room shift, not loudly, not obviously, but like a flock of birds turning at once. The table where Blake usually sat was half empty. Madison sat there with two girls from the cheer team staring down at her salad like it had asked her a difficult question. Tyler and Owen were nowhere to be seen. Naomi went to her usual far table, and Clara followed. They sat down. Nobody laughed. Nobody slapped. The silence should have felt like victory, but it did not. It felt like standing in a room after a storm and counting the broken windows. Clara opened her milk carton and said, "Well, this is cheerful." Naomi looked around. I think this is what accountability sounds like when nobody knows the words. Clara nodded. Kind of quiet, kind of constipated. Naomi laughed, and that small laugh did more for her than Blake's apology ever could. But the peace lasted exactly 6 hours. That evening, Naomi was in her room trying to do algebra when her phone lit up with an unknown number. She almost ignored it, then saw the message preview. You think your daddy can scare everybody. Her stomach dropped. She opened it. There was no image this time, no meme, no public stage, just words, meaner, because they were private. You are still nothing without him. Naomi stared at the message until the letters blurred slightly. Then another came in. Tell your old man to back off before people start talking about your family. The number was blocked, but Blake's fingerprints were all over it. Not literally, but emotionally. The wounded pride, the need to strike from behind a wall, the stupidity of someone warned not to touch a hot stove who decides to lick it instead. Naomi did not respond. She took a screenshot. Then another message arrived. Willowglass Witch. Naomi closed her eyes. For 1 second, she wanted to throw the phone across the room. For 1 second, she wanted to scream so loud the whole house heard it. Then she remembered her father's words. Make the truth inconvenient. She forwarded the screenshots to Renee. Then she walked downstairs. Solomon was in the dining room with 3 men Naomi knew by first names, but not jobs, Marcus, Dean, and Little Ray, who was not little and never had been. Papers were spread across the table, but when Naomi entered, conversation stopped. Solomon looked at her face and set his pen down. What happened? Naomi handed him the phone. He read the messages. Once. Twice. Then he placed the phone on the table so gently it was somehow worse than throwing it. Naomi said, I did what you said. Screenshots. Sent them to Ms. Lawson. Solomon nodded. Good. One of the men at the table, Marcus, leaned back and muttered, Kid's got a death wish. Solomon looked at him and Marcus immediately shut up. Naomi's voice came out smaller than she wanted. Is it Blake? Solomon said, Probably. Probably. That was not comfort. Solomon stood. This is no longer your way first. Naomi felt the air leave her chest. Dad. He walked over and placed both hands on her shoulders. Careful. Warm, father first. You gave him a door. He walked through it laughing. Naomi looked up at him. Please do not make me afraid of you two. That stopped him. The whole room went still. Solomon's face changed, and for a moment she saw it land, really land, that his protection could become its own kind of cage if he let it. He lowered his hands. I never want that, then do not disappear him. Her voice shook on the words. Do not make this one of those stories people whisper about. Make him face it where everybody can see. Solomon looked at her for a long time, and slowly, very slowly, he nodded. All right. Public lesson, clean, legal, unforgettable. Marcus gave a low whistle. Solomon did not look away from Naomi. You sure? Naomi swallowed. I want him to understand what he did, not just fear what you might do. Solomon's expression softened again, but there was sadness in it, because maybe he had wanted the simpler answer, the old answer, the kind that ended problems fast. You are better than me, he said quietly. Naomi shook her head. I am trying not to become either of you. He almost smiled at that. Fair budowed. By morning, the block number was not blocked anymore. Renee Lawson had traced it through the service provider faster than anyone at Pine Harbor expected, helped along by the fact that Blake had used a burner app connected to an email he had once used for fantasy football. Because villains in real life are rarely geniuses. They are mostly careless people with competence. The messages went to the school, Preston Whitaker, and a juvenile cyber harassment officer in the county office, whose name nobody at Pine Harbor had ever wanted to learn. Blake was pulled from first period before the pledge. This time, no one pretended it was about a meeting. Ms. Avery came to the classroom door with the school resource officer beside her. Blake stood slowly, face pale, and the entire room watched him pack his bag. Nobody laughed. That was the part that hurt him most. Laughter would have meant he still mattered as a performance. Silence meant they were already moving away from him. In the hallway, he saw Naomi standing by the trophy case with Clara. He stopped. For a second, something like hatred flashed across his face, but underneath it was fear. Real fear now, naked and ugly. Naomi held his gaze. She did not smile. She did not look away. Blake said, This is your fault. Ms. Avery turned sharply. Blake, Naomi answered before the dean could. No. Blake. It is just finally yours. The hallway went so quiet that even the vending machine hummed, seemed loud. Blake opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The officer touched his elbow. Come on. And Blake Whitaker, who had once strutted through Pine Harbor like the building belonged to him, walked down the hallway with an adult beside him and every eye in the school on his back. That should have been the ending of Act 2. The clean part. The part where consequences arrive in neat folders and adults nod seriously. But life does not always end at scenes where you want it to. Because that same night, Preston Whitaker made his second mistake. He went to see Solomon Bell. Maybe he thought father to father would work. Maybe he thought money still had some magic if you offered enough of it. Maybe he just could not stand the thought of another man in town having the final word. Whatever the reason, he drove through the gates on Willowglass Road just after 9 in a black Mercedes that looked expensive and nervous under the porch lights. Solomon did not meet him in the driveway. He made him wait. 10 minutes. 15. Long enough for Preston to understand waiting was part of the conversation. When the front door finally opened, Little Ray led him into the study, where Solomon sat behind the same wooden desk, not with a drink, not with a cigar, just a cup of coffee and a file open in front of him. Preston tried to smile. Solomon. Solomon looked at him. Mr. Whitaker. That formality stung, and both men knew it. Preston sat without being invited. Because pride is a hard habit to break. He said, "Our sons and daughters are kids." Solomon answered, "Mind your Ross, yours." Preston's smile tightened. Blake made mistakes. Solomon nodded, plural. Preston leaned forward. "Look, I am not here to defend what he did." "Then do not. I am here to solve it." Solomon's eyes lifted. "You think this is yours to solve?" Preston took a breath, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a folded paper. Solomon did not touch it. Preston pushed it forward anyway. A donation to a foundation of Naomi's choice. 50,000. Written apology, counseling, whatever public statement you want. Solomon looked at the paper, then back at Preston. "You brought me a receipt for your son's conscience." Preston's face reddened. "I brought you a way to end this without destroying a 16-year-old boy." Solomon was quiet for a moment. Then he closed the file. "Do you know what your son said to my daughter after he was warned?" Preston did not answer. Solomon opened the file again and read from the printed screenshot, "You are still nothing without him." He looked up. "That is what weak people say when protection is the only kind of love they understand." Preston's jaw tightened. "Be careful." Solomon smiled a little then, not warmly. "There he is." Preston stood. "I know what people say about you, Belle, but this is not the old days. You cannot just push families out of town because your feelings got hurt." Solomon stood too, slowly, and the room seemed to stand with him. "My feelings did not get hurt. My daughter did." Preston's flickered. Solomon walked around the desk, not close enough to threaten, close enough to make the air honest. "Your boy thought he could humiliate someone smaller because all his life you made sure the world cleaned up after him. That ends now." Preston's voice dropped. "And if I say no?" Solomon looked at him for a long second. "Then tomorrow morning, every reporter within 50 miles receives the full packet. The school board receives the full packet. Your dealership investors receive the full packet. The parents at Pine Harbor receive the full packet. And the county receives a formal complaint with every adult who ignored this named in it." Preston stared at him. "That is blackmail." "No," Solomon said. "That is daylight." Preston had no answer for that. And then Solomon added, quieter, colder, the kind of line a man remembers at 3 in the morning. "If daylight is not enough, we can discuss the dark." Preston left 9 minutes later with the donation papers still on Solomon's desk and no deal in his hand. Naomi watched from the top of the stairs as he walked out, shoulders stiff, face gray under the porch lights. She had not meant to listen, but houses like theirs carried sound when they wanted to. Solomon came into the hallway and looked up at her. "You heard. Some." He sighed. Naomi came down the stairs slowly. "Are you going to send everything? If he protects Blake again, yes." She stopped on the last step. "And if he does not, then Blake gets the chance to learn in public what he refused to learn in private." Naomi looked toward the closed front door. "Do you think people like him can learn?" Solomon considered that, and for once he did not answer quickly. Some Ken considered that, and for once he did not answer quickly. Some only learn which stove not to touch. That was not comforting, but it was honest. The next morning, Pine Harbor Academy announced an emergency assembly for upper school students. Nobody knew the details, which meant everybody knew enough to be excited. Rumors burst open before first bell. Blake was expelled. Blake was arrested. Naomi's father bought Pine Harbor. Madison cried in the bathroom. Tyler switched schools. The football coach quit. None of that was fully true, but parts of it had the flavor of truth, which is why rumors survive. Naomi sat in the auditorium beside Clara while students filled the rows around them, whispering, twisting around, checking their phones even though teachers kept saying, "Put them away." Blake entered through the side door with his parents, Ms. Avery and Headmaster Cole. He looked awful. Not injured, not dramatic, just stripped down, like somebody had taken the shine off him. His hair was combed too carefully, his blazer buttoned wrong, and his eyes kept moving across the room, searching for allies he no longer had. Madison sat 3 rows ahead and did not turn around. Tyler stared at his shoes. Owen was absent. Preston Whitaker looked like a man attending his own reputation's funeral. Headmaster Cole stepped up to the microphone and gave the kind of speech administrators give when lawyers help write every syllable. He talked about dignity, digital citizenship, community standards, and the harm caused by harassment, and students listened with the half-bored, half-hungry attention of people waiting for a name to drop. Then Ms. Avery took the microphone, and her voice was different, less polished, more human. She said, "Last week, a student at this school was publicly humiliated, targeted online, and subjected to continued harassment after adults became aware of the situation. We failed to intervene early enough." That sentence hit the room strangely. Adults admitting failure in front of students was rarer than snow in Briar Creek. Naomi felt Clara's hand brush hers, not grabbing it, just there. Ms. Avery continued, "Today, the student responsible has agreed to address this community." A murmur rolled through the auditorium as Blake stood. He walked to the microphone slowly, every step costing him something. Naomi watched him, and for the first time she saw how small he looked without the laughter around him. He gripped the sides of the podium. His first breath shook. "I owe Naomi Bell an apology," he said. His voice cracked on her name. A few kids shifted. He swallowed and kept going. "What I did in the cafeteria was cruel. What I posted online was worse. I made her the target of a joke because I wanted people to laugh with me, and because I was angry she would not react the way I wanted. I told myself it was not serious because that made it easier to keep doing it." He paused. Naomi looked at Preston, expecting to see pride or anger, but Preston just looked tired. Blake continued, "I also sent messages after being told to stop. That was retaliation. I am responsible for that too." The auditorium was so quiet now that Naomi could hear the faint buzz of the microphone. Blake lifted his eyes, finally looking toward her row. "I cannot make anyone forgive me. I am not asking for that. I am saying I did it, and it was wrong." There it was. Not beautiful, not perfect, not enough, but real enough that the room did not know what to do with it. Blake stepped back from the microphone, face red, and for one bizarre second it looked like he might cry, which would have made half the room uncomfortable and the other half secretly thrilled. He did not. He returned to his seat. Headmaster Cole came back up and announced that Blake would be suspended for the remainder of the semester, removed from all leadership and athletic programs, required to complete counseling and community service, and barred from contacting Naomi in any form. It was not exile. It was not revenge. It was consequence. And somehow, because it happened in front of everyone, it cut deeper than a private punishment ever could. When the assembly ended, nobody rushed out right away. Students moved slowly, whispering softer than before. Naomi stood and the crowd around her seemed to part without meaning to. She hated that. She hated that respect and fear looked so similar from the outside. Clara walked beside her. "Well," she said quietly, "that was the most depressing TED Talk I have ever attended." Naomi let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "You have attended TED Talks?" "No, but I assume they have fewer lawsuits." Naomi smiled, but it faded when she saw Madison Vale waiting near the exit. Madison looked smaller without her usual audience, arms crossed over herself, mouth pressed tight. Clara muttered, "Want me to bark at her?" Naomi glanced at her. "You bark. I have range." Despite everything, Naomi almost laughed again. Madison stepped forward. "Naomi." Clara stiffened. Naomi stopped. Madison's eyes flicked to Clara, then back. "I just wanted to say I did not post it." Naomi stopped. Madison's eyes flicked to Clara, then back. "But I laughed, and I knew he was going too far, and I did not stop him." Naomi looked at her for a long moment. The hallway moved around them, students pretending not to listen while listening with their whole bodies. Madison's voice got smaller. "I am sorry." Naomi believed part of it. Not all. Apologies are complicated that way. Some are doors. Some are bandages. Some are just mirrors people hold up hoping you will tell them they are not ugly. Naomi said, "Are you sorry because it hurt me, or because it got ugly enough for people to notice?" Madison flinched. "I do not know." That answer, oddly, was the first honest thing Naomi had ever heard from her. Naomi nodded once. "Then figure that out before you apologize again." She walked away before Madison could answer. Clara caught up to her outside under the oak trees. That was cold. Naomi looked out across the courtyard where Blake was getting into his father's car, head down, Preston's hand hovering near his back but not touching him. "Maybe," she said, "but it was mine." Clara did not argue. By sunset, the story had spread beyond school, not because Solomon sent the full packet to reporters, but because Pine Harbor parents cannot keep secrets when there is a group chat available and moral outrage to decorate. Some said the punishment was too harsh. Some said it was not harsh enough. Some said Naomi's father had bullied the school into action. Some said the school only acted because it feared being sued. For the first time in her life, Naomi was at the center of a storm she had not created, and that felt almost as exhausting as being invisible. That night, she sat on the back porch with Solomon, the air warm and heavy, cicadas screaming in the trees like tiny unpaid actors. He poured himself coffee even though it was late, because apparently sleep was a hobby other people enjoyed. Naomi sat with her knees pulled to her chest. Did we do the right thing? Solomon looked at her. We did the thing you asked for. That is not what I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Right and wrong are not always clean, Naomi. Sometimes you choose the thing you can live with. She watched lightning flicker somewhere far beyond the trees. Do you think he meant it? Blake? Yeah. Solomon took a sip of coffee. I think he meant it while he was scared. Naomi looked at him. That does not count. It counts for something, not everything. She thought about Blake at the microphone, the red face, the shaking hands, the way his apology had sounded like someone dragging truth out of a locked room. She wanted to feel satisfied. Part of her did. Another part felt hollow. I thought I would feel better. Solomon nodded. That is the lie people tell about justice. That it feels like dessert. Sometimes it feels like medicine. Naomi rested her chin on her knees. Do you regret it? Solomon gave her a sideways look. Which part? Any of it. He looked out into the dark yard. I regret that you had to learn what people are like this way. That was not the answer she expected, and it made her throat hurt. She said, I already knew. Solomon's face softened. Knowing and being taught are different things. For a while, they listened to the night. Then his phone rang. Solomon glanced at the screen, and the stillness came back into his face. Naomi saw it and sat up. Who is it? Solomon did not answer. He picked up. The voice on the other end was loud enough that Naomi could hear pieces of it. Preston Whitaker, angry, frayed, desperate. Do you think public humiliation makes you righteous? Belle, you think you can drag my family through mud and call it justice? Solomon listened without speaking. Naomi's stomach tightened. Preston kept going. Something about investors, something about his son, something about old debts and not being afraid anymore, which sounded exactly like something a frightened man says when he wants the room to disagree with him. Then Solomon's expression changed, just a little. What did you say? Silence. Then Preston's voice dropped too low for Naomi to hear. Solomon stood slowly. The porch suddenly felt colder. He said, You should not have brought my wife into this. Naomi froze. Her mother had died 3 years earlier, and in their house, her name was not a weapon anybody got to touch. Solomon's voice stayed quiet, but every word landed like a door locking. Preston, I gave your boy daylight because my daughter asked me to. Do not mistake her mercy for my limit. He hung up. Naomi stood too. Dad. Solomon slipped the phone into his pocket. Go inside. No. Naomi, what did he say? Solomon looked at her, and for the first time in this whole thing, she saw real anger in him. Not the cold kind, not the controlled kind, but something old and wounded, something that scared him too. He said something stupid. That is not an answer. It is the answer you are getting tonight. Then headlights moved across the trees at the end of the driveway. One car, then another. Slow. No engine revving, no drama, just the low roll of vehicles passing the gate, not entering, not stopping, only making sure they were seen. Solomon turned his head toward the lights. Naomi whispered, Is that them? Solomon did not answer right away. The cars rolled past and disappeared down Willowglass Road, leaving the porch in darkness again. Then his phone buzzed with a text. He looked at it. Naomi watched his face harden into something she had hoped never to see aimed at the world while she was standing beside him. He turned the screen away, but not fast enough. She saw 3 words before he did. Back off, Belle. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The cicadas kept screaming. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked once, then went silent. Solomon put the phone away and looked at his daughter, and his voice, when it came, was calm in a way that told Naomi the story had just crossed out of school and into something much older, much darker, and much harder to control. Go inside, baby. And this time, Naomi did. Naomi did go inside. But she did not sleep, because there are nights when your house feels less like a home and more like a pause before something breaks. And that night the Bell house was too quiet. The walls held their breath. The old floors did not creak. Even the refrigerator in the kitchen seemed to hum more softly, like it too understood that something had shifted on Willowglass Road. She sat at the top of the stairs in sweatpants and one of her mother's old college sweatshirts, listening to low voices come and go from her father's study. Solomon, Marcus, Dean, Little Ray, a few others she recognized by footsteps more than faces, men who had been around her whole life but somehow never belonged to any normal category like friend or employee or uncle. They were just there, part of the weather around her father, quiet when things were good, quieter when things were not. Every few minutes, Naomi checked her phone, even though there was nothing new. No message from Blake, no unknown number, no stupid witch joke, no threat, just that cold little memory of the headlights rolling past the gate and the 3 words she had seen on Solomon's screen. Back off, Belle. The funny thing about fear is that it does not always come in screaming. Sometimes it comes in clean and simple. 3 words on a phone, 2 cars under trees, 1 look on your father's face that tells you childhood has officially left the room. Around 2 in the morning, the study door opened, and Naomi quickly leaned back from the railing like she had not been listening, which was pointless because Solomon Bell had spent too many years noticing things people did not want noticed. He stopped at the foot of the stairs and looked up at her. You know, when you were little, you used to hide behind that same post when you wanted to hear grown folks talk. Naomi pulled the sleeves over her hands. I was better at it then. No, Solomon said. I just let you think so. For some reason, that almost made her smile. But the night was too heavy for it to last. He came up the stairs slowly and sat 2 steps below her, not beside her exactly, maybe because he knew she needed space to feel like she still had a choice. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then Naomi whispered, Are they going to come back? Solomon looked toward the dark front windows. Maybe. Are we in danger? He did not answer fast, and she appreciated that, even though it scared her. Finally, he said, Not the way you are thinking. Naomi let out a small bitter laugh. That is not comforting. It is honest. She nodded, staring down at her socks. What did Preston say about Mom? Solomon's jaw tightened, and for a second she regretted asking, but only for a second. You said people in town had been kind to let your mother's name stay clean after marrying me. Naomi felt the words land in her chest, not like a punch exactly, more like someone had stepped into a room they had no right to enter and put muddy shoes on the rug. Her mother, Lillian Bell, had been dead 3 years. Cancer, cruel and fast. The kind that makes doctors stop looking you in the eye before anyone has said the word terminal. And in all the ways Naomi missed her, what she missed most was how her mother could turn a room warm just by walking into it. Lillian had not been scared of Solomon's world, but she had never romanticized it either. She was a nurse, a gardener, a terrible singer, a woman who loved Sunday grocery lists and cheap mystery novels, and if people whispered about her because of who she married, she never gave those whispers a chair at her table. Naomi swallowed hard. He said that because he knew it would hurt you. Solomon nodded. He is scared, and scared men reach for anything sharp. Are you going to hurt him? Solomon looked at her then, really looked, and the porch scene came back between them. Her saying, Do not make me afraid of you too, and him hearing it like a bell he could not unring. No, he said, not the way he expects. Naomi searched his face. What does that mean? It means your way still stands. Daylight. Clean, legal, unforgettable. She let out the breath she had been holding, but it did not fully calm her, because daylight could still burn people, and sometimes legal things ruined lives more thoroughly than a punch ever could. Solomon placed his hands on his knees. Preston made one mistake tonight. Only one. Naomi gave him a tired look. He made several. Solomon almost smiled. Fair. But the one that matters is he stopped pretending this was about Blake. He made it about power. And when a man like Preston makes something about power, he forgets paper, remembers what people try to hide. Naomi frowned. What paper? Solomon stood. Go try to sleep. Dad, tomorrow morning Pine Harbor's board is going to receive a packet. So are the parents whose children gave statements. So are the parents whose children gave statements. So are the parents whose children gave statements. So are the Preston's investors. So is the county. Naomi stood too. You said if he protected Blake again. He did. The room felt colder. Naomi hugged her arms herself. What is in the packet? Solomon paused, then said, the truth. That was a word adults love using right before someone's life became very complicated. The next morning, Briar Creek woke up to rain. Not a dramatic storm, not thunder shaking windows, just steady gray rain that made the streets shine and turned the brick walls of Pine Harbor Academy dark as wet clay. Naomi rode to school in silence while Marcus drove. her father in the passenger seat, which was unusual because Solomon almost never rode when someone else drove. He liked being behind the wheel, liked control, liked seeing the road for himself, but that morning he sat still with his hands folded and his eyes on the windshield, as if he were not riding to school but to court. Naomi watched raindrops race down the window and tried not to think about everybody staring at her again, because that was the cruelest part of public conflict. Even when you were right, even when you were the one hurt, you still had to walk into the room where everyone had made a hobby out of guessing how you felt. Before they reached the school gates, Solomon turned slightly. "You do not have to go in today." Naomi looked at the front entrance, the students huddled under umbrellas, the security guard in a yellow rain jacket, the same white columns that had looked fancy once and now just looked tired. "Yes, I do." Solomon nodded like he expected that answer. Marcus pulled up near the curb. Naomi opened the door, then stopped. "Dad." Solomon looked back. "If this gets bad, do not decide for me." He studied her for a second, and there was something in his eyes she had not seen often. Maybe humility, maybe pain, maybe the strange, helpless love of a father realizing his daughter was no longer a little girl he could carry away from the burning building. "I will try," he said. Naomi gave him a look. "That is not a promise." "No," he said softly, "but it is the honest version." She stepped into the rain. By second period, the packet had landed. Naomi did not know exactly when, but she knew by the way teachers started checking their phones at her desks, by the way Ms. Avery hurried past the chemistry lab with her face tight, by the way Headmaster Cole was seen crossing the courtyard without an umbrella, hair plastered to his forehead, talking into his phone like the person on the other end could personally save him from weather and consequence. At lunch, Clara sat across from Naomi and slid a napkin toward her with something written on it in blue pen. "This school is going to explode." Naomi looked at it, then at Clara. "You could have texted that." Clara took a bite of her fries. "I am trying to bring back handwritten panic." Naomi laughed and then felt guilty for laughing because the room around them was vibrating with rumors. Preston Whitaker's dealership investors had received documentation that his son used school platforms and private accounts to harass another student. After warning that Pine Harbor had ignored earlier complaints, that donors had received preferential treatment, and that several adults may have minimized or failed to report misconduct because of Preston's financial relationship with the school, the county had opened a formal review. The school board had scheduled an emergency meeting. The Founders Weekend banquet, which Preston had sponsored for 6 straight years, was suddenly postponed, then not postponed, then under review, then definitely still happening because schools love pretending ceremonies can hold a community together after the truth has already slipped under the doors. Blake was not in school that day. Madison was, though, and she looked like she had slept in a chair. Tyler came to lunch and sat 3 tables away from everyone, staring at his food like it might testify against him. Owen had switched to remote learning, which was a fancy way of saying his parents had removed him from the blast radius. But the person Naomi kept thinking about was Blake, not with pity, not exactly, but with a strange, unwanted curiosity. Where was he right now? Was he angry, scared, sorry? Was he still telling himself this was all her fault? She hated that she cared, even a little, because his pain was not her responsibility. But that is another annoying thing about being human. People can hurt you badly and still occupy space in your mind long after they lose the right to be there. After school, Naomi found Madison waiting under the covered walkway near the arts building, rain dripping off the edge of the roof and a silver curtain behind her. Clara saw her first and muttered, "If she apologizes again, I am charging by the word." Naomi said, "Wait here." Clara sighed. "I was born to supervise." Naomi walked over. Madison's makeup was minimal, which made her look younger, less like a mean girl from a movie and more like a scared teenager who had been following the wrong person for too long. She held a folded piece of paper in both hands. "I wrote it down," Madison said. Naomi waited. "Not an apology," Madison added quickly. "I mean, it is, but not for you to accept. I just thought if I said it out loud, I would make it about me again." Naomi looked at the paper but did not take it yet. Madison's hands trembled a little. "I told Ms. Avery what I saw. Everything. The cafeteria, the hallway, the group chat. Blake sent the edited picture to Tyler first. Then Owen made a sticker. Then Blake posted it. I should have said that sooner." Naomi felt the rain smell rise from the concrete, sharp and clean. "Why now?" Madison gave a tiny, humorless laugh. "Because I finally figured out I was not afraid of Blake. I was afraid of not being near power." That answer was ugly enough to be true. Naomi took the paper. Madison looked like she might cry, but she held it back. Maybe because she understood tears would not help her here. She said, "I do not expect you to forgive me." "Good, Naomi said. Madison nodded, absorbing it. Then Naomi added, "But thank you for telling the truth." Madison's face changed, not happy, not relieved exactly, just less braced for impact. Naomi turned to leave, then stopped. Madison, yeah, do not become somebody else's shadow just because Blake's is gone. Madison looked down. I am trying. Naomi walked back to Clara, who immediately said, I give that interaction 6 out of 10. Decent growth, limited eye contact, no dramatic sobbing. Naomi shook her head. You are impossible, Clara corrected. At the Bell House that evening, Solomon was not home for dinner. That alone made the house feel wrong. Naomi ate grilled cheese standing at the kitchen counter because sitting at the dining table alone felt too formal and too sad. Then did her homework in the living room with the television on mute. Not watching it, just needing another rectangle of light in the room. With the television on mute, not watching it, just needing another rectangle of light in the room. Around 9:30, Solomon came in through the back door with rain on his coat and exhaustion in his shoulders. He looked older than he had that morning. Naomi closed her textbook. You sent everything. He hung his coat by the door. Yes, how bad is it? For who? She gave him a look. He sighed. The school board is scared. Preston is cornered. Blake is being withdrawn from Pine Harbor before the board can expel him. Naomi sat back, withdrawn. Solomon nodded. Quietly, they think. Nothing about this has been quiet. No. He poured himself water. Not coffee, not bourbon, water, which told Naomi the day had been worse than he wanted to say. She watched him drink half the glass. What happens to Preston? Solomon leaned against the counter. That depends on what people find when they start looking. Meaning, men like Preston build houses with too many locked rooms. Once people realize keys exist, they get curious. Naomi thought about Preston standing in her father's study, offering money like grief had a price tag, saying something about her mother because he was losing control. She did not feel sorry for him, but she did feel the shape of something larger than Blake now, something spreading beyond the school, beyond a cruel photo, into the adult world where people signed checks and buried favors and called it business. Did you plan that? Solomon did not pretend not to understand. I planned to protect you. That is not what I asked. He looked at her. I know. Naomi stood, walking to the kitchen island. Did you plan to expose Preston? Solomon was quiet. Then he said, I plan to expose anyone who made hurting you easy. The answer should have comforted her. Instead, it made her chest ache. Because it was love. Yes, but love with old teeth. She said, sometimes I think you only know how to protect things by surrounding them with fire. Solomon lowered his eyes, and that hurt more than if he had argued. Your mother used to say something like that. Naomi looked away. What did she say? He smiled faintly, but it did not reach his eyes. She said I kept trying to kill weeds with gasoline. Despite herself, Naomi laughed once. That sounds like Mom. It does. The silence after that was softer. Solomon walked over and rested one hand on the back of a chair. I am trying, Naomi. I know, he said, gently but firmly. You know I love you. Dad is different. She looked at him then, and he looked tired, truly tired. Not powerful tired, not dangerous tired, just a man who had carried too many versions of himself for too long and was finally running out of places to put them. Naomi whispered, I do know you are trying. That was enough for that night. The board meeting happened 2 evenings later, and Briar Creek treated it like a championship game, which is to say everybody claimed they did not want drama while arriving early enough to get a good seat. It was held in the Pine Harbor Auditorium because the regular boardroom was too small for all the parents, teachers, donors, and local reporters who suddenly cared deeply about student safety. Naomi did not want to go. Then she wanted to go. Then she told herself she was only going because her father might otherwise speak for her, and that was partly true, but not all the way. The real reason was simpler and harder. She wanted to see the room. She wanted to watch adults say out loud what they had whispered around. She wanted to watch adults say out loud what they had whispered around. She wanted to know if daylight looked different when everybody had to stand in it together. Solomon walked in beside her, not in one of his dark suits, but a plain charcoal jacket and open collar. No performance, no entourage. Though Marcus and little Ray were somewhere near the back because apparently men like that did not stop existing just because you asked for civic engagement. Clara came with her mother and waved from the left side of the auditorium. Madison sat with her parents in the middle, stiff but present. Mr. Halpern sat near the aisle, looking like he would rather be swallowed by the carpet. The Whiskers arrived last because of course they did. Preston wore a suit too sharp for the occasion. Elise looked pale and elegant and furious in a way only mothers can look when shame has entered the family group chat. And Blake walked between them in a navy blazer, head down. jaw tight. The room reacted to him with silence, and Naomi saw him flinch almost imperceptibly. Funny, she thought, how silence had become the one thing he could not stand. The board chair, a woman named Helen Armitage, who had probably been born holding a clipboard, opened the meeting with a statement about community trust, student welfare, and ongoing review. Then the public comments began. A mother of a freshman stood and cried because her son had been afraid to report bullying. A senior boy admitted Blake had shoved him into a locker the year before and everyone laughed it off. A teacher said, voice shaking, that donor influence had made discipline uneven for years. Mr. Halpern eventually stood, adjusted his glasses, and looked toward Naomi without quite meeting her eyes. He said, I saw enough to know something was wrong, and I failed to act. I told myself I was avoiding escalation, but what I was really avoiding is compulsored. I am sorry. The room did not clap. Thank God. Some moments do not need applause. They need to sit there and make everyone uncomfortable. Then Preston stood. You could feel the room tighten. He walked to the microphone with the stubborn dignity of a man convinced that if he sounded calm enough, the facts might get embarrassed and leave. He said his family had been vilified, that Blake had made mistakes but was still a minor, that this had become a witch hunt led by people with personal agendas, that no child should be made into a public sacrifice. There were murmurs. A few nods from parents who liked the idea of consequences, until consequences wore their kids' school colors. Naomi felt Solomon shift beside her, but he stayed seated. Preston continued. Gaining confidence from his own voice, he said, we are teaching our children that one mistake can destroy them, and I refuse to let my son be destroyed to satisfy someone else's need for revenge. That was when Naomi stood. She did not plan to. She did not plan to. Her body just did it, like something inside her had heard enough. Solomon looked up at her, surprised, but he did not stop her. The board chair said, Miss Bell, would you like to speak? Naomi's heart started pounding so hard she could feel it in her hands. Clara's eyes were wide. Madison sat very still. Blake looked at her, and for once he did not smirk, did not sneer, did not perform. He just looked scared. Naomi walked to the microphone. The auditorium seemed longer than usual. Every step too loud. When she reached the front, she adjusted the microphone even though it did not need adjusting, because she needed something to do with her hands. Then she looked out at the room. My name is Naomi Bell, she said. And even saying her own name felt different now. Heavier, but hers. I did not ask for this to become public. I did not ask for people to whisper about my family, or my father, or what they think he can do. I did not ask for Blake to make me a joke either. She paused, breathing carefully. He did not make one mistake. He made choices. He chose to shove me. He chose to shove me. He chose to throw my food on the floor. He chose to step on it while people laughed. He chose to edit my face into something ugly and pass it around. Then after adults told him to stop, he chose to message me again. Her voice shook there, but it did not break. So when people say this is about one mistake, I need them to understand what that sounds like to the person who had to live through all those choices. The room was completely still. Naomi looked at Preston. I do not want your son destroyed. I want him to stop being protected from the truth of what he did. Then she looked at Blake. And Blake, I do not know if you were sorry because you hurt me, or because it finally hurt you back. That is not for me to decide. That is for you to live with. Blake's face crumpled in a way he quickly tried to hide. Naomi looked back at the board. And to the adults, I want to say this. You all taught him he could do it. Every time you looked away. Every time you called it a joke. Every time he decided his father's donations mattered more than some quiet girl eating lunch alone. You taught him, maybe not with words, but you taught him. So if we are talking about accountability, do not stop at the kid holding the phone. Ask who made sure he never had to put it down. She stepped back from the microphone. For a second, nobody moved. Then, one person clapped. Clara, obviously. Her mother tried to stop her and then gave up and clapped too. Then someone else. Then more. It was not a roaring movie applause, thank God, because real life rarely knows how to score itself properly. But it was enough, a rough, uneven sound that filled the auditorium and made several board members look like they wanted to crawl under the table. Naomi returned to her seat and Solomon stood just enough to let her pass. When she sat beside him, he did not hug her. Not there, not in front of everyone. He simply placed his hand over hers for 1 second, warm and steady. That was better. The vote came an hour later. Pine Harbor would open an outside investigation into disciplinary practices and donor influence. Headmaster Cole would be placed on administrative leave, new anti-harassment policies would be implemented, and Blake Whitaker's withdrawal would be accepted with a formal record of misconduct attached, which meant he could leave the building, but not the truth. Preston walked out before the meeting fully ended. Elise followed. Blake lingered for a second near the exit, and Naomi thought he might say something, but he did not. Maybe he had finally learned that not every silence needed to be filled, or maybe he was just out of words. Either way, he left. 3 weeks later, the Whitaker name started coming down quietly around Briar Creek. Not off every building, not all at once, but enough for people to notice. The dealership commercials stopped mentioning family values. Preston resigned from 2 community boards. A local paper ran a story about Pine Harbor's review. Careful with names because lawyers exist, but clear enough that everyone knew. Blake transferred to a school outside Savannah, which people described as a fresh start because that sounds nicer than consequence with tuition. Naomi heard rumors, of course. Some said he was miserable. Some said he was miserable. Some said he was people she had ruined his life. Some said he was keeping his head down. She did not chase the truth. She had spent enough of her life being dragged into Blake Whitaker's version of reality. She did not need to rent space there anymore. Pine Harbor changed too, not magically, not perfectly, because schools do not become brave overnight, and rich parents do not suddenly develop humility just because a meeting went badly. But something had cracked. Teachers watched hallways more closely. Students reported things they used to swallow. Ms. Morristing, Avery started showing up in the cafeteria during lunch, and not in the useless clipboard way, in the looking people in the eye way. Mr. Halpern apologized to Naomi again after class one day, privately this time, and she said thank you without letting him off the hook. Madison stopped sitting with the old group. Tyler wrote Naomi an email that was 6 paragraphs too long and mostly about how he had felt pressured, and Naomi deleted it halfway through because not every guilt spiral deserves an audience. Clara, naturally, became impossible about the whole thing. She started calling herself Naomi's unofficial crisis manager, then made a folder labeled Evidence Goblin, then insisted that if they ever made a movie about it, she wanted to be played by someone with excellent cheekbones and emotional range. Naomi told her she was ridiculous. Clara said yes, but historically useful, and she was. Little by little, Naomi found herself eating lunch with Clara, then with Clara and a girl from chemistry, then with Madison sometimes sitting 2 tables away, not invited exactly, but no longer dangerous. It was not friendship, not yet. It was just a room learning how to be less cruel. That was enough. Friendship, not yet. It was just a room learning how to be less cruel. One Friday in late spring, Naomi walked past the spot in the cafeteria where Blake had crushed her sandwich. The floor was clean now, of course, scrubbed 100 times, polished, ordinary. Nobody else noticed it. To everyone else, it was just tile. To Naomi, it was a marker, not of humiliation anymore, but of the day something in her life had stopped bending. She stood there a moment too long, and Clara, carrying a tray of fries and questionable meatloaf, followed her gaze. "You okay?" Naomi nodded. "Yeah." Thinking about the sandwich, Clara looked down at the floor. Rest in peace sandwich. Gone but narratively significant. Naomi laughed, really laughed, the kind that comes from the ribs and surprises you on the way out. A few students looked over, but not cruelly. Just looked. Naomi realized she did not mind. That evening, Solomon picked her up himself. The sun was low over Briar Creek, turning the wet roads gold, and the magnolia trees along Willowglass Road were just starting to bloom. For a while they drove without speaking. Then Solomon said, "I heard you laughed in the cafeteria today." Naomi looked at him. "You have spies at my school." "I have sources. That is worse. It is more professional." She smiled despite her my school. "I have sources. That is worse. It is more professional." She smiled despite herself. It was just Clara being Clara. "Good," he said. "You should laugh there." Naomi looked out the window. "I used to think if people looked at me, something bad was about to happen. And now I think maybe they are just looking." Solomon nodded. "That is a good thing to learn." They turned through the iron gates and Naomi watched them close behind the car. The same gates she used to think were there to keep danger out, then later thought maybe they were keeping her in. Now they were just gates. Metal, hinges, paint, nothing more. Unless she made them more. Inside the house, she went to her room, dropped her bag, and found Madison's folded note still tucked inside the front pocket from weeks earlier. She had never read it. She sat on the edge of her bed, turned it over in her hands, then opened it. It was messy, overwritten, honest in places, cowardly in others. Madison admitted she had laughed because it felt safer than being kind. She admitted she liked the feeling of being near Blake's power. She admitted she saw Naomi as strange, mostly because she had never bothered to see her as anything else. Near the end, she wrote, I know sorry does not fix it, and I know you do not owe me peace, but I hope someday I become someone who would have stood up sooner. Naomi read that line twice, then she folded the note and placed it in her desk drawer. She did not forgive Madison that night. She did not hate her either. Some things need more room than a clean ending gives them. Later, she found Solomon on the back porch with 2 cups of tea, one for him and one for her. Because he had apparently decided to become a tea person after 60 years of looking personally offended by herbal beverages, Naomi sat beside him. Tea, your mother liked this kind. Naomi took the cup. It smelled like lemon and grass. She sipped it and made a face. Solomon smiled. She made the same face. Naomi looked at him, and for once the mention of her mother did not hurt like a door slamming. It hurt gently, like light touching a bruise. They sat together while the yard darkened. After a while, Naomi said, "Do you think power always changes people?" Solomon leaned back. Power does not change people as much as it introduces them to themselves. Naomi thought about Blake, about Preston, about Headmaster Cole, about Madison, about herself. I do not want people afraid of me. Solomon nodded. Then do not make fear the rent they pay to be near you. She looked at him. Is that what you did? He took a long breath. Sometimes. Do you regret it? He watched the trees for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, I regret the times I mistook being feared for being safe. Naomi let that sit between them. It was the closest thing to confession she had ever heard from him. She said, I was afraid this would turn me into someone hard. Solomon looked at her. Hard is not always bad. Stone is hard. So is bone. One keeps people out. The other lets you stand. Naomi stared into her tea, thinking that sounded like something her mother would have liked or mocked gently, depending on the day. I think I am still figuring out which one I am. Solomon smiled softly. That makes 2 of us. The final scene, if life were kind enough to arrange itself like a movie, would have been Naomi walking through Pine Harbor with sunlight behind her. Everyone parting in respect, Blake gone forever, Justice tied up neatly with a ribbon. But real life is messier and more interesting than that. Some students still whispered. Some adults still resented the Bells for exposing what everyone already knew. Some people said Naomi had gone too far. Others said she had not gone far enough. In Briar Creek, depending on who you asked, Solomon Bell was either a dangerous man who bullied a school into submission or a father who fondly forced powerful people to care about a quiet girl they had ignored. Depending on who you asked, Blake Whitaker was a cruel bully who deserved every consequence, or a dumb kid whose future got dragged through town because one family had more muscle than mercy. And Naomi, depending on who you asked, was a victim, a survivor, a princess behind iron gates, a girl with a dangerous last name, a warning, a rumor, a problem, a symbol. But here is the thing Naomi learned by the end of all this. People will name you whatever helps them sleep at night. They will call you weak when you do not fight back, cruel when you finally do, dramatic when you tell the truth, dangerous when the truth costs them something. You cannot spend your whole life correcting every mouth in town. At some point, you decide who you are and let the noise embarrass itself. A month after the board meeting, Naomi stood at her locker while students moved around her. Loud, ordinary, alive. Clara was arguing with someone about whether banana bread counted as cake. Madison was taping a flyer for her student safety committee to the bulletin board. Her hands still shaky, but doing it anyway. Mr. Halper nodded at Naomi as he passed, and this time he did not look away. Near the front entrance, a freshman dropped his books, and 2 older boys started to laugh out of habit, then stopped when Naomi glanced in their direction. Not a glare, not a threat, just a look. One of the boys bent down and helped pick up the books. Naomi turned back to her locker, hiding a small smile. Maybe that was power too. Not fear exactly, not control, just a quiet possibility that a room could remember what happened when everyone looked away. At lunch, Clara asked if Naomi missed being invisible. Naomi thought about it. Sometimes, Clara blinked. Really, Naomi shrugged. Invisible was lonely, but it was simple. Clara nodded like this was wise, then stole one of Naomi's fries. Well, visible Naomi has better snacks. Naomi rolled her eyes. You are the worst crisis manager. And yet, thriving. Naomi laughed again, and this time she did not check who was looking. That afternoon, as she walked out through the front doors of Pine Harbor Academy, the sky had cleared after days of rain. Sunlight hit the white columns, the brick paths, the wet grass, and for a moment the whole campus looked almost innocent, which it was not, but maybe places are like people, capable of being ugly and still worth forcing to become better. Solomon's car was waiting at the curb, but Naomi did not hurry toward it. She stood at the top of the steps and looked back through the glass doors, down the hallway where Blake had once stood laughing, where teachers had looked away, where students had whispered her into something smaller than herself. She was not smaller now. She was not bigger either. She was just Naomi Bell, 15 years old, still quiet sometimes, still angry sometimes, still unsure what justice was supposed to feel like, but no longer willing to confuse silence with surrender. As she walked to the car, Solomon stepped out and opened the passenger door. "Old-fashioned," she said. "Raised right," he answered. "Debatable." He laughed, and the sound surprised both of them. Before she got in, Naomi looked back once more at the school. "Do you think they will remember?" Solomon followed her gaze. "Some will follow her gaze. Some will pretend not to, and the rest will wait until it costs them something to understand." Naomi nodded. That sounded about right. She got into the car, and as they drove away, Pine Harbor Academy shrank in the side mirror. Not gone, not forgiven, not fixed, but behind her. And maybe that was the most honest kind of ending anyone gets. Not revenge wrapped in music. Not a villain crushed beyond repair. Not a perfect apology, but a girl who had been made into a target learning to walk out of the frame on her own terms. So now I want to ask you, and be honest, because this is where the story is uncomfortable. Did Naomi's family go too far, or did Pine Harbor only call it too far because the powerful finally felt pressure themselves? Was Blake just a reckless kid who deserved a second chance, or was he protected for so long that only public consequence could reach him? And what about Solomon Bell? Was he a dangerous father using old power to settle a school problem, or was he the only adult in the room willing to make everyone stop looking away? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I know people are going to disagree on this one, and that is exactly why it matters. If this story made you think about justice, bullying, family power, or the price of staying silent, hit like, share it with someone who has seen a community protect the wrong person, and subscribe for more stories where the quietest person in the room turns out to be the one everyone should have listened to from the beginning.